Hi, 3DMJers. This is Andrea Valdez, and you're listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jeff Alberts and Eric Helms as we do our third ever audience Q&A session. All four of these discussions that we're going to get into were received from listeners who submitted their questions via our website at 3dmusclejourney.com/QA. In this episode, we'll cover how we might program differently for competitors versus those who just want to get jacked and shredded without ever hitting the stage or platform. We also talk about overweight and obese individuals trying to get their fitness journey started in an intelligent manner, how we might handle CrossFit athletes who want to compete in bodybuilding someday as well, and how to deal with coaching your spouse or significant other towards their own lifting or nutritional goals. While the four submitted questions definitely get their answers addressed during this episode, you'll notice we kind of end up creating full-on 20-minute discussions about each of these topics because that's just kind of how we roll. Every single little inquiry kind of leads us to consider all the other times that similar inquiries and questions come up for us as coaches. And because we love to talk and settle into long-ass discussions, we kind of cover the entire answering spectrum from many different angles along the way, and we hope you guys like it. So as usual, if you have any feedback or comments on this particular episode, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and leave it under podcast number 64. Here is Q&A session number 3 with Jeff Alberts and Eric Helms. Question number 1. It's really long. Are you ready? I mean, it's not really long, but it's thorough. It's from James. I'm assuming non-response means you're ready. Okay, so here I go. From James. Hi there. I was wondering if you have any advice for the serious but non-competitive lifter like myself with the goal of building a good physique over time. Specifically, what differences in approach would you suggest for a non-competitive lifter looking to build their physique? For example, I'm going to paraphrase now. For example, I don't have any deadlines to compete. Yeah, I want to keep my body fat levels reasonable. He gives percentages that I think are too low, but we can just go for reasonable. What would you see being the advantages and disadvantages for the non-competitive lifter looking to build a good physique? Would you begin it any differently? Blah, blah, blah. All that. Eric, you want to give me your thoughts on that?
All right. Yeah, I think it starts kind of the same. Like for someone who's just getting into this, is someone who would be getting into it for the purpose of getting on stage long term, is that the first step is just kind of understand realistic goals and how to set things up. So basically, like most people who are not competitive physique athletes, their goal is to basically find the leanest body composition they can maintain while still holding the most muscle mass they can hold on to, while still being able to make progress in the gym, feeling healthy, feeling good, not being food focused. So like you said, you're paraphrasing, or we can use different numbers. I think that's actually an important thing I'm going to highlight is that most people with that goal think or try to be leaner than they actually can be.
Right. So do you want me to throw that in there? It was range. He said wants to keep body fat levels reasonable range, say 10 to 16%.
That's not too bad.
That's not too bad.
But the low end to the high end is very different. I feel like people from 10 to 16 is very.
But I like that because that says basically I don't know. Like I'll diet down if I can maintain 10%, great. But if I end up maintaining 16%, and that's what I can do, then that's fine too. True. And if that's actually what the person was thinking, then fantastic. Because most of the time it's like
10 or less. Like, yeah, all the time, dude.
Or 8%, or if that's too lean, I'll go to 10%. And I'm like, come on, So yeah, I think that's actually a really good perspective. Is focus less on that number and just see where that is. And the process of actually getting to the point where you are as lean as you can be, which may or may not be that lean, holding onto as much muscle, feeling good, not being food focused, and able to make progress is going to be a lot different for everybody, and it's going to require a long time of nutritional habituation, which is a little redundant, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Habit habituation? Is that what you said?
Habit habituation. That's a very important thing.
Well, I think, damn, y'all, I've been trying to get away from saying I think so much, and there I go. First thing I said.
You're allowed to say you think.
I know, but I say it all the time. But I digress. Okay, so where it differs, I know, it just wants to come out, is I think the only time that it's different is whenever you have someone that, when we get someone that says, I want to be on stage within the next year or the next 2 years, versus someone who's like, I just want to look really good, right? Because ideally, even a competitor, when they first start lifting, you would hope that they're like, at some point, 5 to 10 years from now, I'll get on stage. But they're usually, the only reason they start out differently is because they give themselves too early of a deadline, when they really could start out the same whether they have competitive goals or not, right? I mean, lifting is lifting, developing habits over time is developing habits over time. It's when you decide I want to be a competitor that then the changes, we might have to start someone differently. If they do a Skype with us and they say, I'm getting on stage in 11 months, that would be different. But if they say, I want to be a competitor in the next 10 years, how do I start? Then that would be the same as a lifter who had no competitive goals.
Yeah, a little more relaxed approach.
Right. But not just relaxed for the sake
But I
of
mean,
being
the goal
relaxed.
is the same. The
That's
goal
what I'm
is
saying.
either way. You're competing or not competing, getting on stage. Your goal is to get more muscle. So
Well,
really, that's the approach. Almost really is the same. Just the timelines and the deadlines
I would be
change.
quicker to put someone in a more aggressive surplus if I knew they wanted to get on stage, though, and they didn't have enough mass, versus if they were just like trying to live life for the next few years.
That's true. Because if they're saying, well, yeah, that's basically kind of what Jeff said. Like, if they've got a deadline in 3 years, I want to get on stage, then, well, if you don't have enough muscle, we have to be doing a lot in these next 2 years to make sure that you're in a good position to get on stage. And then when we're like a year out, we need to think, okay, maybe we got a little too fluffy. Let's think about kind of a timeline for prep or a pre-diet or a maintenance phase like Berto does, et cetera, you know? So yeah,
Right.
I think you guys are both right.
Thanks.
But
I think yeah, the number thing, it's like it's important but not important, because I think people who are too focused on the body fat percentage, that can kind of skew the right approach. It's like if you're trying to chase some number that's, let's say, 10%. I mean, sure, you can probably diet down to that or whatever, but then the question is, at 10%, is, like Eric's saying, is that sustainable? Right? Are you food focused there? A whole another set of questions arises once you get there.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people, they shoot themselves in the foot when they're just so focused on numbers. I think, just focus on the performance, make sure you're eating enough. Don't worry too much about aesthetics until you got some of that foundation going with the training and with the nutrition and the behaviors, all that. Then once you're kind of ironed all that out, then you could be like, okay, let me try to chase a certain body fat percentage or the visual look that you're after, if it's sustainable. That's the thing.
Right. Okay. So in summary, ideally, we wouldn't start them differently, but it's just...
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
I think there's often kind of a little bit of a gap, at least for people who follow us and follow probably similar sources of information, on kind of like the middle ground between quantitative data or instruction. Like, here's the number that you should use to get shredded. Here's the rate of weight loss, your breakdown of your macronutrients. Here's how to figure out your maintenance calories, and here's the level of deficit you should get. And then on the other side of it, we have stuff like, the podcast and articles we write about, where we're basically saying, hey, like, trying to be shredded all the time isn't reasonable. You're a human. Life, every culture on the planet includes food as part of our social activities, and changing your nutrition is actually changing your lifestyle. You have to pay heed to that without too much information in the middle of, okay, well, here's how you create structure to habituate those changes in your life. And I think that is really, you need all three of those pieces. Like, you need to understand, right, I'm not a machine, but here's the actual numbers and guidelines and things that probably make sense that I should be trying to do. And then most of your focus should be on, all right, how do I create a structure that works for my lifestyle, my loved ones, my goals, that incorporates both? And that is kind of a lifelong and constantly evolving process.
Yeah.
Yeah, would you think it's kind of like starting with a bigger picture in mind. Like you start with a big picture, and then all those numbers, the little nuts and bolts, those things, you're going to have to adapt those things based on the big picture. And usually the big picture is like the long game. Like people don't think long game. They just get so fixated on these numbers or the small minutia, and it skews the big picture. So they're in a sense going inside out versus they should go outside in.
Yeah.
If that kind of makes sense.
Well, so, I totally agree. And I think some of that comes from watching bodybuilders who do have everything riding on, like, let's say the last 3 months of a prep where you are manipulating a lot of X's and O's and you're in the midst of it, and you kind of have to be a little more reactive sometimes. Even if you did all your planning right, you kind of have to be reactive to a degree to really make sure that you're bringing your best on game day. And I think bodybuilders therefore place a lot of emphasis on, well, should I walk my carbohydrates up and get ready early, or should I do this or that? And so I think that gives this false perception that those are the things that matter to someone who's not a competitor, because they look up to competitors, when in reality, they should be doing exactly what you just described, Jeff, is playing the long game and building from the outside in, if I got that right.
Yeah, that sounded right.
Big picture down to details, to put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something that I find comforting in and out of it, and that helps as an athlete, is that, like, there's a long game, but there's really, like, no end to the game until you, like, die. I mean that in a positive way. Like, it's you can say, but when I get to 10%, it's like, but then you still have the rest of your life. So what are you going to do? Okay, you have this show, but you still have the rest of your life. So what are you going to do? And if you, by big picture, like you said, as a non-competitor, when you say you have no competitive deadline, then it's like, shouldn't you be comfortable being like, maybe at some point down the road, 10 to 16 is going to look great, but right now it probably looks small. And so it's just...
yeah, that's true. Like if you don't have that much muscle mass, and let's say you're 16% body fat, but then 5 years later, after training for 5 years, you're 16% body fat still, but you're going to look better. You're going to look bigger because you have more muscle mass. So it's definitely different depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
That's a tough perspective to get when you're early on. Like I think most people approach fitness, and even bodybuilders, approach fitness with end goals in mind, like when I get my pro card, or when I win my show, or when I get to X body weight at X body fat percentage, and then that's the goal, full stop. And I think you can certainly like repeat that process and do it over and over again. Like I want to have a physique worthy getting on stage. I want to get on stage. I want to do well in the novice division. I want to do well in the open division. I want to get a pro card. I want to actually compete in the pros. I want to do well in a pro show. I want to compete at worlds. I want to win worlds. Like you could do that. Whether you get there or not could mean that those goals never end. But so long as you do that, you're eventually and repeatedly going to have these now what moments. Mm-hmm. And I think it's probably useful in order to achieve each one of those goals to also get very invested in the big picture and the process of looking at what are the similarities between each one of those goal achievement periods, and then how do I habituate that into my lifestyle? Instead of just having to see these constant, fitness commercials, basically.
That's kind of been my thought process actually this last week, because I'm like, okay, I committed to a show 6 weeks, but I don't want to, I'm committed to that, but I don't want to be a now what after that. It's like I'm already thinking past that, already kind of setting myself up for after the season's over to try to keep this going. Not stay at obviously 6, 7, 8% body fat, because that's unreasonable, but not letting myself venture out too far from the lifestyle that I've created the last year and a half. I want to keep that going, whereas in the past it's always like, okay, now what? End of the season, that's it, I'm done. And then it really goes back, swings almost a whole complete 180. Yeah. So I'm trying to think about the now what's and kind of limit, make the transitioning so it's not so different in a sense.
Right.
Which is it's an interesting experiment too. I've been watching you go through your prep, and you're going I think anybody would just objectively look at that without the context of the rest of your life or your goals or where you're at in your career and go, that's unreasonably slow. But at the same time, you're creating such little contrast between your diet and your normal life, and you're considering, well, how can I not get too heavy in the off season, and how do I keep myself at, a reasonable off season percentage, and take this 30 years of experience and actually make it into something that's a little more lifestyle like. And I would say this is an experiment in trying to go right. So if I diet very, very, very non-aggressively, is that something that I can shift into something that's more maintainable long term? And I think it'll be cool to see if that's effective. And that's a very useful perspective for people who are onlookers, because while no, we wouldn't recommend you diet for a year and a half to lose 25 pounds if you're in your third year of competing, but that could be a potential strategy one would use if they're at the point in their career where you are, which I just think I think that's a good way to get away from quantitative guidelines and to have people go, right, that's I do need to look at the big picture and figure out what makes sense as far as my long-term goals.
It's the same kind of perception, like if you're someone starting out and, the mentality of bulk cut is shifting up and down so harshly. Like if you put it on a graph, it's like straight up and down. Whereas the way I'm doing it, it's more like looks more linear. Mm-hmm. So I think the same thing could be said, like for someone who's starting out or intermediate, like don't make things so harsh. It doesn't have to be so aggressive one way or the other.
Yeah.
So that's something that, again, that's more big picture thinking.
Yeah. And if this ends up being successful for you too, that's going to mean you won't need to diet as long for your next season when you do compete as well. So it feeds into the next goal.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's trying to set myself, like personally, this is just my own personally, 32 years in, I'm trying to set up the last 5 to 6 years of my competitive years where I could actually just, there's a show 2 months from now. Okay, no big deal.
Yeah.
I'm not that far off. Okay, I'll diet for 3 or 4 weeks and boom, I lose 2 pounds and now I'm on stage.
Yeah, and I think that's a tough perspective for people to get. Like, I dieted for a year and a half in 2016 and 2017 so that in 2019 I could diet for 2 months. That's not the way most people think.
No. I'm trying to just like, okay, whether I'm successful on stage or not this year, it's like, okay, but next year and then, the year after that, the tail end of the career is going to be more successful because I'm putting the groundwork in 2016 and 2017 for that.
Yeah, and not that that's something we recommend for 99% of.
The thing is, I'm saying I haven't dieted for 18 months like straight. It's like there's been.
But you have 30 years of training. I'm just saying, like where you are in your career, that is a really cool experiment. But I would hope that anyone listening in the first 5 years of lifting would not go hard for 2 years, so they don't have to go hard next year, kind of thing. That's all.
No, that's
well,
not.
yeah, I mean, exactly.
Which is, I know that's not what we're saying, but
Jeff's trying to figure out the last, phase of his career. So someone who's just getting into it, like the person asking the question of how do I do this if I'm not a competitor? I think it's important just to think about what are your goals? What are your long-term goals? You're not a competitor. You're probably relatively young, or at least young into lifting. So sustainability should be your goal since you're not getting on stage. And so you have to kind of think about the long-term picture if that is the goal.
Yeah. A lot of that was really useful for competitors that we just talked about, but that's how I was trying to bring it back to to what he was asking, and if they weren't, like Jeff's planning out so far ahead and he's having fun and tinkering with this, and again, like you said, figuring out how to like end his career on a high note, wherever, whenever that is, the next 5-10 years. But as someone who doesn't have, like Eric, you said, look good on stage, get on stage, novice, open, like someone who doesn't have that ladder, how do they deal with that?
Yeah, I think the parallels should be actually quite similar to what Jeff is doing, which is why I brought it up, is that there shouldn't be these drastic cut bulk phases. If your goal is long term, you might go through a sustainable based cut to get to the point where you get a little hungry and then maintain that. And then see if by increasing your food, holding on to that body fat percentage, you're no longer food focused. Awesome. Then you just see, can I make good gains? Do I feel good? Is my sleep quality high? Am I happy? And then making progress in the gym, great. If you want to go through that phase again to see if you get a little leaner, that's fine too. Just be prepared that might not result in the same thing. That might mean that when you bring food back up, you still want to bring food back up more, and I think that's basically the process you go through. Is you take these less contrasting approaches to find where can I hang out and where is that kind of settling range for me, and then focus on just making progress and dialing it back every once in a while, because progress typically means a small surplus.
So whether or not a stage is there, a good way to create benchmarks for yourself is creating your own experiments.
Mm-hmm.
I know I always do that with like pretty much everything in life, like work cycles. Like we just started with myself, and like, can I journal this for 6 weeks straight? Can I write a blog post every day this week? Can I do, things like that. But like what is it, gamification? I think you've talked about once, Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to make little games. Yeah, I think and keeping it systematic too, because I know it's so easy to get swept up in whatever content you're consuming and wanting to try that. And then your own data gets confused by the data that you read from other people. If everyone's singing the praises of carb backloading and you try it, but you recently switched from something 2 weeks ago and you switched 3 weeks later, and you only did carb backloading for 3 weeks, and you didn't really see much of a change, you're probably going to actually convince yourself it was good. Like I've seen this time and time again. You just try something for a little while. Everyone on the internet says it's great, and it was meh for you, but somehow in your head it was good because that's the way it was. And you tried 10 different things and you never stuck with anything. I think you need to be systematic. You need to take notes, write down data, stick with something long enough to see a difference, and then use that as a catalog of experiences rather than just like a catalog of ADD, So.
Yeah.
That's the conversation I had with someone on Skype today, basically. Because they saw something, oh, that looks cool. So they heard on a podcast, and it was like, oh, I want to implement that, or thinking about implementing it. And I'm like, well, basically, you're just going to end up being a follower of all these so-called programs or whatever, instead of looking at your own data and making the adjustments based off of your history versus just going with a whim on what someone else said to do. So you can be stuck in a vicious cycle doing that.
Yeah, I've got no problem with people changing their protocols and following stuff and doing that. It's just that most of the time the time frames are completely inappropriate. Like instead of program hopping, it should be like, program long-term vacationing or something like that. Like I remember when I was playing with West Side based templates, I trained in that manner for a year, with little variation. And then when I was playing with Shaiko, I did that for like a year and a half. And then, when I was doing kind of your basic upper lower kind of approach, strength and hypertrophy, I did that for even longer. And I've been playing with like full body approaches and blending hypertrophy and strength training now for the last 2, 3, 4 years, and just perfecting that. But, like when I write down if I commit myself to a training block, it's 5 to 7 weeks, like every time. Like I do that, I analyze it, I look at what the similarities were, and I have a system for doing that. And I think if you don't have that, but you're trying out a bunch of different things, you're not really trying them out in a sense that you're getting experience. You're playing,
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And nothing's wrong with that if you aren't very attached to your goals. But if you are, that's when you get really frustrated. Like if you want to be an exerciser and just have fun in the gym and look a little better every 2 years, like that's cool. But I think it needs to be, your commitment has to align with not how bad you want it, like in a rah-rah kind of way, but like, is this the most important thing in your life? And if it's not, right, then how, like, I feel like a lot of people get frustrated when their desires don't match their efforts, and they don't even think about like where those fit with each other, right? So if you don't have to be a competitor to be at a certain point in your life where you're like, I want to maximize my physique for these next 2 years. Therefore, go ahead, treat yourself that way, and maybe you don't get on stage, but you want to get to these goals. And then now you're in med school and you just don't want to look like trash and you want to feel good. Well, then that's cool for a couple of years. But it's just when someone says, I've seen it both ways, where someone says, I want to be this 10 to 16% body fat, but I want a social life and I want to go to school and I work and I do all this stuff, and then they're pissed off, right? And vice versa. they're like, I want to be a little fitter. And so they find a bodybuilding program and they do all this crazy shit and they like can't maintain it. And then they're angry in the opposite way. So aside from running your own experiments and realizing the big picture, it's like when you say sustainability, a lot of times I feel like that's the difference is the information I'm consuming and the thing that I'm trying made for someone like me who's where exercise fits there on my priority list, wherever that is, kind of thing. Or physique or whatever.
Well said.
That was a long time on one question.
And we didn't trail off it onto different directions at all.
No, it was right on the money. I'm sure he wanted every piece of that conversation. Okay.
The guy knows more about Jeff's prep than what to do for himself, but that's okay.
I think everyone likes hearing Jeff's prep, though.
I think it related.
I think so, too.
I brought it up.
Eric's such an asshole sometimes, I swear.
I can't help it.
You said that, Jeff, not me. Usually everyone says that I'm the asshole. It makes me happy.
No, you're just angry.
I'm not angry. I'm just
passionate. Chill out. Don't get so mad at me, all right?
It's the couch of rage now. I'm not in my recliner right now. Okay.
Yep. It's the casting couch of rage.
Next one. Okay, from a guy named David. What do you feel about an overweight person reverse dieting to fix a slow metabolism from years of Weight Watchers dieting? It's happened to me, and no matter how much I increased my workouts and lowered my intake, the weight just wouldn't come off. I've been reverse dieting for the past 6 weeks and see my weight starting to fall off as my calories go up. But I hear some trainers state that overweight people should only be cutting. I know that wasn't like a very direct question because I was like, what do you think about it? But I do know that Eric from our from the muscle and strength pyramids, once that was written, the FAQ, that came up a lot, right? Is like, I see these equations, like we talked about, I see these numeric guidelines, roundabouts based on data, but if I am like, say, over 30% body fat, those numbers kind of sound a little crazy. What should I do?
Yeah, some things to consider is that a lot of the BMI equations, not BMI, excuse me, BMR equations or energy expenditure equations are based on the assumption that body fat percentage. If they don't include body fat percentage, they assume a non-obese person, which means that as your body fat percentage goes up and up and up, that's a less calorically active tissue. So someone who weighs 300 pounds but is 6'8" and jacked is going to have a much higher energy expenditure than someone who's 5'2" and is 300 pounds and doesn't lift weights. And there's a lot more that goes into this. Like, so a lot of what we consider quote unquote metabolic adaptation is primarily adaptations in energy expenditure that's not directly related to your metabolic rate. It's non-exercise activity thermogenesis, subconscious behavior, and other things like that, which do adjust with food intake. So they can drop quite substantially, or they can go up in some people if you're eating more. And typically people who are overweight and struggle with being overweight have a much more suppressive effect of dieting on that. Also, it's really important to point out that the harder you diet, the poorer adherence gets. And this plays subconscious and conscious effects into it. Like, the more likely you're going to have that binge day where you go, well, that was a wash, let me get back on track the next day. But that day still counts towards your total caloric intake, and might be why sometimes fat loss isn't stable when you're dieting hard. It's because you're primarily focusing on the days where you did good, and those few and far between, even if they're only once a week or once every 2 week days where you kind of blow it out of the water, that still has an impact and can slow things down. And reverse dieting is another kind of term that can mean a lot of different things. Reverse dieting sometimes is I add 1 gram of fat and 5 grams of carbs every week that I don't gain weight. And I think that's probably unnecessarily slow. Like, I would be adding probably, like 50 to 100 calories per week, so long as you're not gaining weight, or even gaining a small amount of weight if you're still not looking like you're gaining body fat. I think it's good to plateau. And here's what I mean by that, especially when you're overweight, is that just like we were talking about that situation where you get into a what now with goals for weight gain and bodybuilding and just trying to get bigger and stronger, when you're trying to lose weight, you can get into a what now situation, especially if you were dieting hard and taking semi-extreme approaches, or at least non-sustainable approaches to your fat loss. Once you actually get there, you may or may not have the skills to maintain that. And in fact, the data would suggest the vast majority of people can't maintain fat loss. So when a plateau does come up and you're dieting hard and you're not losing weight, shit, man, take a break. Put your calories at maintenance, drop your cardio in half, and just eat as much as you can without gaining weight until you feel not just ashamed and wanting to diet or disliking your body and wanting to diet, but actually motivated and reinvigorated to the point where you're like, I'm ready to do this again and be successful. Because I think a lot of the times plateaus tend to coincide with times when we're just a little fatigued from the diet. If they're lasting longer than a week or two, like if you've been stuck for a month or 2 months and you're cutting hard, that's demotivating. Well, just shit. Eat as much as you can. Don't lose weight for a while. Spend 2-3 months just enjoying life and maintaining what you've accomplished. And that's great practice at where you will eventually get to when you lose a lot of weight. And I think sometimes the reverse dieting approach is too slow to get you there. I'd much rather just throw 500 calories at you and cut your cardio in half, and then make small adjustments from there than, spend 8 weeks just to get 500 calories added to you.
Yeah, that was a lot, dude. That was good. I'm gonna
Thank you.
pick that apart if that's cool.
Damn it, it was perfect. There's nothing to pick.
What?
I'm just kidding.
Oh.
Just kidding.
I thought it was good, but okay, let's hear
Well, because
apparently Andrea thinks it's terrible.
No, because it doesn't address. I don't think necessarily this person's. It does, like there's some global things I think that we could address from take this opportunity from this question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would be mentioned fixing the slow metabolism, which we kind of breezed over, but. I guess, is that a thing? How extreme, and Eric, you might know better, like approximations of how extreme of a diet and for how long till you feel like slow metabolism is actually a thing? Like you talked about how food can increase it, but how do we actually damage that?
Yeah, so like I said, when you decrease calories in your diet, non-exercise activity thermogenesis can go down a lot. People who tend to be overweight seem to be the ones who it goes down the most in. But true metabolic adaptation, where not taking in activity into account and just the actual metabolic turnover in all of your body tissues decreasing, is actually pretty limited. We're talking maybe 5 to 10%. And it is very temporary. And as soon as you seem to turn calories around, it goes up, especially if you gain weight. Like the harshest it could be, and like the most we've ever seen, if you go like 3 standard deviations from the mean, which would cover like 99% of people, is that if you were to predict your energy expenditure at your body weight, and that's including body fat percentage in a pretty accurate way, you might be burning 2/3 of that. So if you were supposed to be burning, say, 3,000 calories, you might only burning 1,800, which is a big difference. That's not most people. That would be the people who tend to struggle the most and have the most adaptable, quote-unquote, metabolisms. But a large part of that is actually just adaptations to NEAT. And feeding, again, will reverse a big part of that as well.
Right. Good. So last part of that I hear some trainers state that overweight people should only be cutting.
Yeah, I think those trainers are way too focused on physiology and not focused on humans. They're going right. So if you're high in body fat, leptin levels are high. The purpose of refeeds or diet breaks is to increase leptin. You're a machine, and therefore no need to do refeeds. But the reality is the whole reason you're doing diet breaks and taking time and staying at maintenance and using a plateau as a tool and trying to eat as much as you can when that happens before diving back in is because we're trying to create habits and habituation, and we're treating you like a human being with long-term goals, not a leptin ghrelin output, which I think is a very misguided way to try to coach people because they're not studies. So those trainers are...
Well, I mean, only, right, that word pretty much always...
Yeah. Now that said, there are actual there's the odd reports of like someone who went on a complete no calorie intake and just having like a vitamin mineral supplement for a year and lost not eating food for a year and was fine. Like medically supervised complete starvation. It's just like, no, I don't want to eat. I'm good. I'm overweight, and lost a shit ton of weight. And there is actually data showing that rapid weight loss for obese people for a period of time actually predicts their likelihood of sticking with their diet long term, because all of a sudden Everest, which is the metaphor for the amount of weight loss you have to lose, all of a sudden becomes climbable when you're losing 6 pounds a week instead of 1 pound, like we'll often recommend. So there's a different approach that you would take with someone who's obese versus someone who's just a little too heavy. But in both cases, eventually you get to a point where it needs to be sustainable. Even if you're doing some things immediately, like, right, we need to get you out of a quote-unquote metabolically dysregulated state. We need to get you motivated that fat loss is possible. We need to really kind of shock the system, and mentally and physically, so that we are drastically changing things, because your habits need a complete overhaul. And now we're going to kind of wipe the slate clean and reintroduce new habits. But even that, you eventually have to get to a point where you're treating the person like someone who's going to have a long-term sustainable relationship with food, not just going on the fact that an overweight person should be able to oxidize a lot of fat all at once and therefore doesn't need diet breaks or refeeds. So maybe you take 3 months of aggressive dieting, losing 1.5 to 2% of your body weight for 3 months, but then after that you do a 1 month period in maintenance, and then you go to a sustainable diet. You might be able to lose 50 pounds in those 3 months. And if you've got 150 pounds to lose, that's a great motivating thing to do. But it becomes less and less sustainable as you have less and less to lose, and less healthy, as you can't create that many calories to replace that deficit from lost body fat.
Expectations get out of whack.
Correct.
But I mean, in this problem or this situation can happen to anyone, overweight or not, that you diet so hard that you just can't lose anymore. That I don't think that's while it could be an effect of like because you did Weight Watchers or whatever, but I don't think that problem inherently is because you are overweight, right? We see it with our competitors, we see it with average people, we see it with anyone who restricts themselves for too long. I mean, like you said, there are, if you look at it just physiologically, if you do that, even though you said not to do it, but if you do, like, there is a point where more food will help you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can get yourself in a situation if you're dieting hard and long enough and in an inappropriate way where you're losing just as much lean mass as you are fat mass. Your energy expenditure is only 2/3 of what it should be. You are completely food focused. Your sleep is disturbed. You're highly stressed. Your libido's in the tank, and life sucks. You're not making gains in the gym, and every time you make a cut, it just seems to make all that worse. And for the effort you're putting in, the amount of weight loss you're seeing is minimal. And because you're so stressed, you're retaining a shit ton of water, and you can barely even see your fat loss in any kind of discernible way. That is definitely a reality that we've seen in multiple populations. And the solution is chill out. Eat more. Don't diet so hard. Take a diet break.
And especially for not competitors.
Not an extreme approach.
For non-competitors.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Jeff? I thought I heard you.
I just said, yeah, I agree.
Oh. He says, here. Okay.
Cosign.
Eric, I think I want you to help me with, even though this question is like to me, I want you to help me with this though. Maybe. We'll see. Okay, so I wanted to put it in here because this is one of, I don't know, like the 10 times in the last like 3 or 4 months that I've gotten it somewhere on the internet, which is a guy named Eddie who says, I visited Andrea's Instagram profile today and saw that she's doing a lot of CrossFit sessions. So I'm a CrossFit coach and athlete competing in a national and international circuit. Interested, how does Andrea manage her CrossFit workouts and hypertrophy workouts in and off season, in off and on season? Thanks for answering. So I think I don't ever
some faulty assumptions in there.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of things with that, right? I don't have where we put a label that says this is for hypertrophy and this is where you will grow. I train to get better at skills. but I'm also eating enough to perform well at all those skills, and therefore parts of me are still growing. I think the first initial fallacy, right, is that when you have a power day, you're not just getting good at powerlifting, and when you have a hypertrophy day, you're only growing, right? So that's the first one. What else?
The other one is the assumption that you're a bodybuilder in the off season who's doing CrossFit.
Yeah.
Which you sort of is true, but you're actually just someone who has competed in bodybuilding and is now going to do that again in the future, but currently focused on grit. So.
Yeah. So, I think too, it's the question that I'm sure comes up for a lot of people is like, how are CrossFitters so jacked, right? That's another one. That's like when they're not doing hypertrophy sessions. And I'm not, Eddie, this is not...
The funny thing is they only ask that question if they look at the highest level CrossFitters, who are, of course, the ones who get the most attention because they're jacked and competing at a high level. Yeah. They're not like, man, every time I go to the local box and see the WOD, it looks like freaking Mr. Olympia. Like, no, it doesn't, you know?
Not at all. Yeah. Well, what's cool is CrossFit actually did, every year they do this big old thing on Netflix. Like they make a movie of the CrossFit Games, right? And what's good is this year they opened the whole documentary with that conversation. They're like, CrossFit as a methodology is to help people live better, be healthier, move better, And they're like, and then there are these crazies that decide they want to compete in the CrossFit Games. And I think that is the initial thing that needs to be understood, like you said, Eric, that there's recreational CrossFitters, and generally they don't look like that. Then there is this kind of breed of like, you were a high school or college athlete, and you are going hard when you go to CrossFit, but you are still not at like these dudes were jacked because they did varsity football, and then now they do CrossFit, but maybe that they already looked good to begin with, kind of thing. And then, like you said, there's the elite of the elite. And Eddie, this is not me like picking that on you. It's just, it brings up, I think, a good conversation that we need to go further into. I think I just address that looking at male gymnasts' upper body, right? They don't have necessarily hypertrophy sessions, but they're jacked as fuck. So I think some things that I guess I want to say is that personally, I don't balance the two, and they both happen. And I think just there's this forever misconception that even on the micro scale of like when someone's running a fat program, right, that power day is I'm getting stronger this day and the hypertrophy day is this. So training is training, stress is stress. Sure, we can make it more complicated, but we can also complicate it in a good way so that we can evaluate things, but also overcomplicate it to the point that like there's just no need for it. I don't know.
Yeah. I think one thing as someone who's been balancing Olympic lifting, powerlifting, and bodybuilding, to give a little bit of insight here, is that if you're a strength athlete and you are expressing that strength through a few different movement patterns, you've got like a hip hinge and a squat and upper body push and upper body pull, it's hard to make your physique degrade. And where it does is pretty minor. Like Jeff got on me a few years ago for my calves having shrunk. But he didn't have that like much more to say than that, you know. It wasn't like I had, what happened to your pecs? Like, I don't know, benching stopped working because I'm doing it for powerlifting. You know, that didn't happen, you know.
I will say he did shrink a little bit when he was Olympic lifting. Like his priority was Olympic lifting. Uh-huh. Like me and Berto, when we saw him in Australia, like, okay, yeah, Eric looks a little small.
Yeah, that's true because I was only benching once a week. And all my overhead work was like leg assisted, and I would say that's true. But I don't think my quads shrunk and my traps got bigger.
No, there's just certain parts of you that were a little smaller.
Yeah. You can get holes in your physique relative to things, but I was also still trying to figure out how to balance it. But right now, I currently probably have the best physique I've ever had, and it's because I've figured out a way to balance it. But anyway, I think. Andrea, correct me if I'm wrong, but as a grid athlete, you're still doing, every once in a while, you're doing like bench, right?
I don't bench very often, but I do chest press a lot often, and I do rings, so I do dips. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of push-ups.
Push-ups.
Every time I get to the top. Yeah. So that's the thing, right? Is it's just it's a human body moving things. Yeah. It's not like Jeff is weak because he doesn't compete in powerlifting. Like they're so interconnected. Yeah, there's specificity, and that can make the difference at the end, or the last. I don't know. It becomes more important the more elite you are. It becomes.
Are you doing more? Would you say you're doing more volume with this training than you did
so much
compared to like back when you were powerlifting and bodybuilding?
Yes. Yeah, but it's and then too, my intensity comes in different ways, right? It's not. There's so much different that I don't really know. We had this talk at the airport, right, Jeff? There's so much different because, like, every day there's Olympic lifting, so there's the speed and strength, and it's at pretty high intensities. And then I typically do just strength, so squat or deadlift. And then I have a skill piece, usually, which, whether that's pull-ups, muscle-ups, handstand walks, I don't know. And there's usually a metcon component. So, like, if I'm doing box jumps and wall balls, like, that's leg volume. It's not, no, it's not for...
Yeah, like, to demystify it, like, hypertrophy is a component to all force production. So any sport where force production is important, if you're training for that effectively, you're going to see some hypertrophy. Now, when you're talking about like grid, that is a very force production dominant sport. Right. And it has a lot of different disciplines that you have to produce force over. All lifting weights is doing force over joints, right? So if you have a sport you're training for where you have to produce force from multiple different angles and multiple different body parts and isolated and in combined ways, and you're training for that, you're going to grow if it's enough volume at enough intensity or to failure enough to put tension on fibers. Right. So when you look at what Andrea does...
but not as fancy as Eric did.
He's a fancy asshole, huh?
Well, yeah, Jeff was getting at that. You know,
he's a fancy asshole.
I am a fancy asshole.
I'm gonna get you a glitter down there. I'm a fancy asshole.
Yeah, I like that. But yeah, I'm Jeff. I'm probably guessing that's what you were getting at when you were like, "Are you doing more volume now?"
Yeah, exactly. Because her workouts are still intense. There's a lot of force there. Yeah, exactly.
They're long as shit.
There too.
Yeah. So it's almost like it's apples to oranges. Like we said, like it's the same thing, right? You're going to grow if you're training, but at the same time, it's in my particular situation, it is so different from before. In that one, the number of reps is probably tripled or more per week, to be honest. But I hit probably more high intensity things and more low intensity things, right? I also eat a lot more, like a lot more than I used to. I also, I have a way bigger aerobic engine than I used to, and I do a lot more aerobic work, which is still not that great compared to the great CrossFitters, but I do like run, row, ski, erg, swim, something at least every day.
It seems like you have a good tolerance for injury too. Like you would think, like the stuff you do, I would think like, okay, if most people are thinking like, oh, I want to do what she's doing, that didn't happen overnight. So if someone's thinking like, I'm going to start doing that, like I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, the injury rate's going to be higher.
Yeah. Another thing too, and this isn't me. So feels like
that's
Eddie.
Dead on that,
Eddie, we love you, and this isn't like us picking. Like when you said, "Do I balance it?" Well, I think we answered that. Like I don't really attempt to do anything specifically for hypertrophy, but it does bring up a conversation that I now know 5 other people that are like, I want to start Olympic lifting now that have no business doing it in my personal life that I know of. Hope they don't get mad at me for saying that. I've had a lot of people reach out to me that ask me to coach them because they want to do more functional things, and I don't think that that's my position. Like not in a shitty way, but I don't think everyone or a lot of people that have been bodybuilding should attempt to do a third of the shit that I'm doing. I think it's a bad idea. In the bodybuilding off season, it is a bad idea.
I think people forget that you had a background as a collegiate level gymnast.
Gymnast, exactly.
Collegiate cheerleader, but I was a gymnast for a long time.
Cheerleader.
Yeah.
Cheerleader, gymnast, bodybuilder, and strength athlete were all elements of your highly dedicated elements of your training before you started to do this. And I can tell you, as someone who got into Olympic weightlifting at 30, and like just being in the position to do a snatch or a jerk took a ton of work, and I never really quite got it. And I had repeated neck strains like every 3 months for the years I was doing Olympic lifting.
Yeah.
And so, like, yeah, I didn't have any background in any of the things Andrea had, and I'm also not doing any of the gymnastics stuff or any of the fatigue stuff to then bring that into the Olympic lifts when I'm doing it. And I had issues, and I don't really Olympic lift anymore. I include some cleans and push presses in my training, and I'm probably not going to Olympic lift anymore. So I think that's just something to keep in mind. Like, powerlifting is often a better fit.
Yeah. And that's all just that's a good question coming from someone who does that. But I think for most of the listeners of the podcast, right, there are a lot of things you can do to keep yourself, like you can keep progressing and there without completely derailing your program. There are things you can do if you're creative enough to feel like you're mixing it up a bit or getting that little athlete kick out without being like, I want to join a CrossFit class or I want to start competing in Olympic lifting. I don't know, maybe you want to learn a handstand, maybe. I'm not trying to make fun, I'm being for real, like that's hard enough of a goal for most people. Maybe you want to run outside of the track twice a week at night in your off season or like something, but I don't think that if bodybuilding really is your goal and you're looking for something to do between seasons, like you said, powerlifting is a great fit. I don't know, acro, yoga, running, softball, but there's a lot of things that you can do that are hard that aren't, like you said, Jeff, going to increase your risk of injury so high that don't take as many hours. I mean,
because there's a lot of skill involved. Yeah. Not just like, oh, let's throw some things around. No, that's a lot of skill. That's going to take time and practice.
Oh, it's fucking embarrassing.
Someone who might be getting into that, they might actually maybe see regression with muscle mass because they're learning the skill of trying to learn these lifts and they can't move the heavy loads and things like that.
Yeah, like you will be so far from, I don't know, 50% of your back squat for a very long time if you decide that you want an Olympic lift. I don't like in any of those.
Strongman's another good option.
Yeah,
that
Strongman's a good
multi events. It has an endurance component. It's anaerobic, but it doesn't require the extreme mobility, or does require more motor skill, but certainly not a level of motor skill that to do it at the kind of level that you see Andrea doing it requires either years of training with a healthy body that is mobile or a background in cheerleading and gymnastics. I think that's something you could do. I played around with strongman, but it's tough because you need to have access to a bunch of equipment.
Or that remember that guy Fitz when we were in London? What does he do?
Yeah.
Calisthenics? But like slow controlled presses and stuff. That's super cool.
He's crazy. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to do the bar training, join the bartenders or the barbarians out in the Bronx where that all started. You guys know about that stuff. The problem is there's no real leg exercises when you do the street workout or the calisthenics stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. But there again, you can keep your program intact and find ways to do things. I just think, in my opinion, right, Olympic lifting, which is a part of CrossFitting, but those things I think are just way more difficult. I know they have a barbell, but they're very just get a bar and try for like 2 days and you're going to be embarrassed. It's going to be really hard. And if you want to, it just takes like how many years to, I mean, those Chinese kids start when they're like 5 and I don't know. It's just.
And they start with gymnastics before they get into Olympic lifting.
Yeah. So it's what am I trying to say? I'm not saying like I did it, don't do it. I mean, you can.
There's not a
It's
low
just-
barrier to entry. It's not something to pick up casually in the off season if you're going to train hard and then try to do bodybuilding. However, I think maybe what would be useful is if we approach this question like, what's his name, Eddie?
Yes.
Like, if Eddie is already a successful competitor in CrossFit and has a high level of fitness and is doing all this and wants to compete in bodybuilding, what is the best way to balance that? That might be a more useful answer to his question.
Instead of us just
I
being
envision him sitting here going, thank you right now. Maybe we should spend some time trying to approach it from that angle.
He's probably like, this is not what I fucking asked. Thanks.
He already tuned out. He stopped listening.
I know. Sorry, Eddie. You're great for watching my Instagram, though. And I appreciate it. And I should, DM me so I can follow you back.
Unfollow.
No,
Unfollow, Eddie. Just leave. We're
See,
terrible.
this is why people think I'm mean. I'm trying to make a global statement based off a question, and now I'm the asshole. Okay. No, but like you said, okay, so your calves with Olympic lifting, I can tell that a lot of parts of my physique are getting better.
Calves with powerlifting. Actually, I had calves during Olympic lifting.
Oh, because okay.
Because everything is triple extension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I was just telling you, a lot of places in my physique are growing, like my back, my legs, but my arms really aren't, and so I feel like SpongeBob. So some curls would be nice. Curls, calf work. But I mean, chest, right? There's not a lot of. There's not a lot of.
Or you can do muscle ups, which a lot of.
But even then, it's still a little different. It's not the same as like a bench or a fly. Like a lot of CrossFitters end up with that round, like the shoulders rolled forward, giant lats, but like very tight and short pecs and not very big. So it would be maybe just adding like 3 hypertrophy based sessions per week would be something easy, like 3 hours a week.
Or even just like a list of exercises that you sprinkle in and get in, because a lot of the times CrossFit isn't incredibly structured. So if you have a flexible approach, like I would probably give a CrossFitter a list of exercises, like get in 2 chest press variations per week, get in 1 hamstring curl, 2 calf raises, 2 arm isolation exercises each. Keep it low intensity, maybe even BFR, just so you can keep the load off your joints, which are already getting plenty of a beating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And maybe some additional rowing if you're not, because I see a lot of like vertical pulling, but not a whole lot of rowing typically in CrossFit, unless they're doing like ring rows and stuff like that. Yeah,
there's so much. I feel like back is never. Usually, I'm trying to think of like the typical CrossFit.
I mean, they're doing deadlifts. They're doing
they have a lot. They usually have like
radius.
Giant wings, no chest, maybe not so great buys. That's kind of it, though.
I would agree.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if did we address that?
I feel like that was good.
Yeah. How does she balance it? She doesn't, but it works out. Okay. Oh, and he said ciao at the end because he is from Italy. That's cool. Okay.
Ciao, Eddie.
Can you guys do a podcast on coaching your spouse? I feel sometimes they're the hardest to coach, but I've learned a lot from trying to coach a loved one. You like how I typed that fast and I wrote catch? How to catch a loved one.
Catch a loved one.
No. So Jeff, you've done this twice, eh?
I think I'm successful now, but not before.
Okay. Why were you not, and why are you now?
Because now I don't try to force coaching on my wife now. Whereas before, I think I was with my first wife, I was a little forceful and she wasn't as accepting to it. Whereas now it's like my wife now, she's like, I just know like when she's ready, she'll tell me or she'll just start doing it. And then I'm like, okay, like just recently she started tracking macros. Mm-hmm. And remember about a year or so ago when she started training, like maybe a year and a half, close to 2 years now, when she started lifting weights, I'm like, don't even stress on macros or anything. Just eat and then just enjoy your lifting and that's it. Mm-hmm. So here we are, a year and a half later, and I see her pulling the scale, starting to weigh things. So I'm like, okay, she's doing it on her own. Now I know she's wanting to do it. She's going to probably be more accepting if I do offer help. But I didn't even do that. I waited for her to ask. And once she asked, then I was like, okay, now I'm going to coach her. Because she's going to receive what I tell her now. She's going to be open to it. Whereas there was a total 180 with my ex-wife.
Did your ex-wife ask you to coach her? Or were you like, hey, you should really da-da-da?
She asked for help, but then wasn't really wanting help, if you know what I mean. Wasn't accepting to it. So it was more of like,
okay.
It was more like my husband's telling me what to do, versus me saying, trying to help her, which I was trying to. It just wasn't really productive.
Do you think that she? What am I trying to ask? Like, do you think that she wasn't in a place to receive advice, or do you think that the advice you were giving her was overbearing and you were like expecting more of her than maybe she was ready to do, if that makes sense?
I think it was both, because I think back then I was not as experienced as I am now with helping people, coaching people. Like back then it was more like, this is pre-3DMJ, pre-internet days. So it's like, it was more bro. The way I was doing things was bro, and it was more like, okay, you got to do what I do.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really good coaching, really, if you think about it. But at the same time, it was like, I think partly her fault too, because she really wasn't accepting of any kind of help. So no matter what I told her, even if it was like solid advice, because not everything I said was like terrible, it just wasn't. She wasn't in a place to accept it. And there was times where I probably was like, she didn't really ask for help, but I just kind of forced it, or wanting her to do certain things, and it was just like headbutting.
Yeah.
And that's so I think it can be tricky. I think like because I've had other people ask me about this, or they'll come to us and say, "Hey, my wife or my girlfriend, this is what's going on with her." Da da da. And can you help her? Like they're in a sense they're coming to us to fix her, and it's like she or he needs to come to us and ask for help.
Yeah.
Because then it's going to be more accepting.
I think people would be surprised by how often that happens to us. That we'll get emails that are like, hey, I've been trying to help my wife lose weight for this long. I can't do it. Can you send her an email? Or we have clients that are like, because they're figuring it out, are now like, I'm trying to get my husband to too, but it's just not working out. Like it's pretty common that once you brought that up, I was like, oh shit, that's right. We get one like at least once a month, right?
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem that they're experiencing. Yeah, I've had a similar thing. Like, so Barb and I got together in 2005. She didn't start lifting weights until 2009, and I never encouraged her to. She just knew it was a big part of my life, and she saw some of the positive benefits, and at a certain point thought it might be cool to do powerlifting, and started working out with me, and wanted me to program for her. And so over the last 8 years, so she's technically like one of my longest term clients I've ever had, I've made tons of mistakes and also figured out how it works. And I think the issue and like why we were highlighting that whole emailing us about your spouse is such a problem is you start doing things with your spouse because you have a prior existing relationship that you would never do with a client if you're a personal trainer. Like I wouldn't sit around your house if you were one of my clients and tell you why fitness should be important to you and be really, really like aggravated if you're not doing it because I'm concerned about your health and our future together. But that's what happens in a marriage, you complain to me all the time about you're not happy with your body, and I tell you what to do, but you don't do it. This is just like with the laundry or whatever. Like you bring all this other baggage into it. Like you would never say anything like that to your actual clients. Like when your spouse doesn't listen to your advice or doesn't follow a plan, you feel disrespected as a husband, not just as a coach, Well, with I'm a coach, I'm like, hey, don't worry about me. These are your goals. I'm not going to get mad at you. You came to me. You signed up on our website. You came to me. I'm here to help you. I think your plan needs to be respectful to you, et cetera. But if it's my wife, then it's so easy to be like, wow, you really don't think I'm a professional, do you? Like all this other bullshit comes into it. And so on the other end of the person receiving information, when you tell them what to do, they can feel judged or they can feel like they're not being respected because they didn't come to you, follow your stuff, sign up and say, hey, I would like your help.
Yeah.
So the solution that I've found with Barb and is that I actively put on different hats. So I have workout partner hat, I have husband hat, and I have coach hat. And I will straight up ask, hey, what do you need right now? Do you need your husband who's just going to be loving and supportive? Do you need your workout partner who can push you but is not necessarily going to tell you what to do? Or do you need your coach who's actually going to give you specific advice that you're asking for? That coach, with the way my coaching style with Barb is much more reactive. Like if she's doing something and her squat looks shitty, I won't say anything. I encourage her to videotape her squats, and then if she says, hey, my squats don't look right, what should I do? Because that preserves our marriage and our workout partnership, which because we're all three of those things. So I think ritualizing and heavily and purposefully delineating what the roles are at the time allows you to step outside of some of that baggage. So when I'm putting on my coach's hat, I'm the coach. And then as soon as that starts to go sour, I go, hey, do you have your athlete's hat on right now? Or are you like getting mad at Eric, your husband? And then we can kind of parse that out. And then I'll just switch roles, but I don't push it. So yeah, I program for my wife, but I don't actively coach her until she wants it or needs it. And then I'm very much thinking about what does she need? What do I think she might want? I ask her, she tells me, vice versa, to make sure it works. Because it's gone very bad at times, for sure.
Is your coach hat fancy?
It's the fanciest hat ever. You like like a pimp from the 70s?
There's a feather in it?
That's like not fancy enough. That's
like big ones?
Like
I'm gonna pull out that picture of you and Barb when you guys were karaokeing at my house with that. Pull that out.
That's the hat right there. That's
But yeah, like last night, she was weighing her food. She's still learning, so there's still some things like she was weighing her powdered peanut butter, and she didn't put the peanut butter on the scale first, etc. Whatever. But anyways, she just hands it to me, goes, here, figure it out, and I was like, and I got irritated. It was late at night, it was like towards the end of the day, I was tired. And I was just like, so I kind of snapped. Like it was like Eric said, I didn't differentiate. It was more like the grouchy husband as opposed to the actual coach who should have just like, okay, this is how you should do it. Let me walk you through this. So that was like, that was like a bad little thing there. So good reminder, Eric just told me right now, put your hats on.
I really like the girlfriend hat, so I don't even try to coach B. He's never asked me to. Listen, I don't. We don't.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I think that's it too. Right? Is I am self-aware enough to know that I will be a pain in the ass. I probably am anyways when I'm not as a coach. But well, okay. So he did his own body. So he's not new, right? So you got Barb into it. Susanna just started, and you're there to guide her, right? So Brandon already did shows before I was a bodybuilding coach. And his and
he's a smart dude. He's not naive to all this information nor experience.
Yeah. And there's things. Okay, so Berto, for those who don't know, Alberto coaches my boyfriend when he gets on stage now, right? And there will be some things that Brandon will do that I, as an athlete, I'm like, I would never do that. Which I know we've had this talk before. We've had these talks before, right? But Brandon's such we prep so different. He's been with me when he met me, I was prepping, and I'm like the anal don't touch my shit. It needs to be perfect. We're like I overboard my prep, and that's just how I operate. But that's how I operate life. And Brandon's the exact opposite in life and in prep. So it would never work. And even when he has a question, usually he won't come to me, which I like. Like he'll post it on Facebook, and Eric usually answers it. Actually, is what happens. But yeah, I don't think that that's a hat that I should even try to do because I care about our relationship so much.
It has a lot of potential to go poorly. I think that's one thing. Is like a lot of the times from like. Not always gender roles, because sometimes you'll get a chick who's into fitness, and then they start dating a guy and he's curious.
I forget.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think a lot of the times we definitely more often get husbands emailing us about their wives or girlfriends, and I think that is often not done well. Like when I look and see what those relationships are like I'll see the husband speaking for the wife, or saying here's what I think their goal should be, or here's the way they should train. And even if they don't bring that into their world, like they aren't sexist like in their workplace or other places like that, they think because I have an intimate relationship with my wife, and because I'm the expert, I can tell them what their goals are and all that stuff. And they forget that if it's not coming from the person, then they're not going to stick around. It's not going to be sustainable. And at worst, there might be some unspoken resentment from not feeling like the person has agency. So,
right.
That's not an effective way to go. And it often causes much more problems than it ever solves.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of something to consider as well.
Yeah, and I think, too, we work well on other, like if there's photo things, obviously I'm like, Brandon, do this. If there's there's a lot of times he'll come with me for like business stuff or writing stuff or whatever, but for whatever, because I know how dieting is, especially contest prep dieting, right? Because I guess you guys have never coached your significant other to the stage. That's nothing that I want. You have? Barb went to this? Barb competed? Oh, in figure.
Yeah, she competed in figure in 2011.
Never mind, yeah. Well, in my case, I know that because we operate so differently, and because I think I would watch his every move if I was running his prep, and I don't think that would be nice of me.
Yeah, that's, and it's because also it's not only different for the spouse to have basically their trainer living with them, it's different for the trainer to have their client living with them.
Yeah.
Like we have a good level of separation. Yeah. That encourages autonomy. And it does all the things we try to get. We want them to feel competent. We want them to feel autonomous, and also have a support network. But like the payoff for having a support network always there is a huge detriment, or is not worth constantly having someone there who you're thinking about, oh shit, if I do this, what is my coach going to think? Or you're thinking, oh, he or she could be doing that better. Like, yeah, you have to set up some type of system if you're living with your athlete, or vice versa, you're living with your coach, to where you have coaching times or not, or whatever. Like, even if Barb was like, fuck it, I'm not following my diet today, I'm going to have whatever dinner I want, and she was in the middle of a diet and I was coaching her, I'd be like, yeah, whatever, I wouldn't say a word. And then when we had our time where we were going to review the nutrition plan and the fat loss, I'd be like, so, what issues did you run into? And she'd be like, well, obviously you saw me eat that whole dinner. I was like, yeah, so about that. It wouldn't be like, what are you doing? So I think you have to preserve and keep separate boundaries there. I mean, look at it this way in other professions. Like, the most fucked up kids I know are kids who had parents who were psychologists who tried to psychologize their kids. Or when I see, like, kids who are overdiagnosed with stuff, it's like their doctor won't let their GP be their GP. They're trying to be the kid's doctor. And that's why they have those separation where you're not supposed to, be the therapist for a family member. You're not supposed to do surgery on your son, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's because you don't act the way you're supposed to. You can't separate your emotions and your relationship from what you professionally have to do, and you make mistakes. You do dumb shit.
Except y'all do that, both y'all.
Well, no, that you have to.
Easy.
Well, that's
it's
the
not
thing,
easy though.
Yeah, you have to have that's exactly it. Is you have to have a structure in place to acknowledge those dual relationships.
Yeah. So I guess the crux of it is, is this you have to first evaluate, is this something that you're willing to add to your relationship or not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of people just skip that step completely. They just think, oh, I'm a trainer and I have a wife and she's in fitness. Perfect. She doesn't have to pay for a trainer. Yeah, but you may be paying with your marriage, So, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's going to cause a divorce, but it can definitely cause marital problems or relationship problems.
Yeah. I mean, think about, like, what happens when you're like, what color should we paint this wall? And then magnify that behind the, like...
Man, the fights we get into over deciding what's for dinner. Come on.
Dude.
What do you want for dinner? I don't know.
See, and that's another thing, right? This is just as further insight. Brandon and I never eat the same thing together. Like, his dad freaked out when he realized I didn't cook for Brandon and that he doesn't have to cook for me. Like, we'll be like, okay, you want to eat dinner in 30 minutes? All right. And then we'll go make our separate meals. And then we sit down together. Yeah, we don't Like, I don't cook for the fam and vice versa. Like, that's just how our relationship works. We're very, very independent. Whereas I know most, not just a lot, but I think most people, like you said, like go to dinner together or cook for, like we cook together. Yeah, see, we don't do that. So we're sure as shit not going to be prepping each other is all.
Yeah.
It's just, okay. Any other advice on that, Jeff?
No.
Okay.
No.
Just be careful. That's all.
Don't do it, but if you're going to do it, get the hats out.
And if you're going to make some adjustments and they're not going to be, they're harsh ones, then yeah. I mean, just think about what's going to happen an hour later when you're watching TV and stuff.
And if you die,
how's that popcorn, you fucker? I'm eating broccoli.
And then
where are you sleeping tonight? Oh, you're sleeping on the couch. That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
and then you're in charge of tanking your spouse's libido. That would suck. Anyways, we would go there, I guess.
It's true.
I'd feel weird about that. Okay. Last question. Holy shit, that was loud. Last question. From another James, but this James has a Y in his name. He's fancy too. In regards to physique athletes in a contest prep, how low is too low for cutting calories and macros? I understand the general guidelines are, and he lays out some numbers from the pyramids pretty much. How low does your team go, or how low have you brought calories and macros for athletes? If you have an athlete who isn't at the best starting place metabolically, like they're maintaining weight on low calories, how do you handle it once you can't cut calories anymore? What strategies do you implement to further elicit fat loss? Okay.
We're talking contest prep?
Yeah. So in prep, part 1, how low do we allow our calories to go? And fat.
I typically don't. This is an average of the week calories, so including refeeds. I try not to go below 10 kcals per pound, which is roughly 22 kcals per kg if this person is from not America. However, sometimes you need to. Sometimes I will get as low as 8, or the equivalent of I think 20 kcals per kg. But that's typically for a brief period. And then if that stalls, it's diet break time for sure. It's probably diet break time even before that.
Yeah.
Earlier, multiple times throughout the prep. As I find that allows you to not have to get dirty like that.
And fat?
0.5 grams per kg is the lowest I go.
And then I think
and as a caveat, if you have to go really, really low and down to 8 kcals per pound, let's say you do that for 4 weeks to really kind of dig before you do a diet break, and you go slightly below that fat limit just to preserve carbohydrate because they specifically seem to perform better and have better adherence with higher carbohydrate, okay, that's fine. It's 4 weeks. It's not going to kill anybody. But as normal steady state, we're going to diet on these macros for 8 to 12 weeks kind of thing. Yeah, 0.5 grams per kg is probably as low as I'd go.
Also, we have the luxury, right? Not everyone has this, but we also have certain protocols that when we get to, is it 9 calories per pound? And then where we have to report to Steve and the team if we're too low.
That's true. We have thresholds if we start skirting the limits that we're talking about more or less, we contact the whole team and we put our heads together and figure out if there's another option before we push them into the danger zone, and then just make sure that our RD is comfortable with that, so that it is. And we also talk to the person, would you be okay with this? And if they say yes, and then the team agrees, and then we can't think of any other options, and it's just what we got to do, then we do it for a period of time and adjust from there.
Yeah.
That's pretty rare. Pretty rare that happens. I think if you're doing your job right, that should be few and far between, but it does happen.
And then
I was just gonna say, yeah, I think if things are to prep up initially with enough time and they're in a good starting position, you're gonna avoid a lot of the just getting really drastic with things.
And,
it's usually when you're in a time crunch is when you're like, oh, okay, we got to really take you down now. We got to bring these calories way down and try to make something happen.
And it's after months and months of diet. It's not like those are starting numbers by any means ever, right? And so I guess that's a good segue into what he said. Like, what do you do? Yeah, what do you do if someone comes up and comes to you and they're not eating food? You don't start prepping them until you feed them. Personally, I mean, we'll either tell them this isn't. You're not eating enough. We can't really go from here. So if your show is in 8 weeks and you have 15 or more pounds to lose and you're already not eating anything, we just don't do that show. Or we don't coach you, right? Or you pick a later one and we will feed you for at least a couple, hopefully up to like 8 more weeks, walking shit way up as far as we can before we have to cut. But sometimes someone will, like this happened to me, where it theoretically the prep timeline should be enough time, but we end up having to cut it close because we have to include a walk-up period before we go down. Otherwise, like, I'm not comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest tool you have to deal with these issues is pre-planning beforehand. Yeah. Having someone look at shows more than a year out and then figuring out, having dieting data in the off season, like a mini cutter here or there, just kind of get an idea of where they need to start. And then making sure that before the diet even starts, they're eating as much as they can, with doing as little as cardio as they can while still being in a reasonable striking distance. And then doing things like when you hit your first plateau, doing a diet break, not cutting further, so that the total slash to calories by the time you have to get really low has been less, so that really low isn't that low by the time you have to do it. Yeah. So, yeah. Like by the time, I'll give you a recent example. Like I'm prepping Luke Johnson right now, and he's been dieting for, I think it'll be 9 months all in told. And he's already done 3 diet breaks, I want to say, during that period, kind of spread out, where we take a week at maintenance. And basically that's allowed us to make minimal cuts to his macros. And that's not an uncommon thing that we do at 3DMJ, is if you give someone enough time, diet breaks your first port of call when someone stalls, then you're often able to diet on similar calories to where you were stalled afterwards, or at least for a little bit longer, or the cut doesn't have to be as drastic.
And I think, too, see, how many times have I said I think when I said I wasn't going to say I think? Anyways.
You're allowed to think.
But I don't need to tell you. Obviously, if I'm saying it, I thought it, obviously.
I think it's probably more distracting to freak out every time you say I think.
I didn't freak out until
it's kind of like a baseball player who gets in the batter's box. You got to tap his shoes. They just it's a ritual. You got to do that to set it up. So go for it.
It's the shoe tap.
Tap those shoes.
Okay, like Dorothy. What's that? To talk about when it does get that bad, right? Because we do need to, I guess, or not need to, but it'd be cool to address when it does get to that point. We talked about the low end of macros. We'll crank the shit out of cardio if we need to. We'll introduce HIIT, which I know Jeff just talked about on our YouTube channel. If y'all didn't check out that blog post and video on tools for cardio. But then, too, which this has happened to me before, sometimes you just don't lose anymore, or you get smaller and look shittier, and that's just what you have. Like, I think to be realistic about that is that sometimes you just don't. And
there are times when you have to cut your losses, like the remaining time you have and how bad the person's gotten beaten up, and their cuts make things look worse than, okay, we're just going to start eating up into the show, even though we'd like to have you 5 pounds lighter, and then we'll see what we can do next time, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Exactly, because if you try to keep going, running them into the ground, what ends up happening is they're getting on stage flat as shit, and you look unhealthy on stage, deprived. You don't have. I'd rather put, if let's say you're 4 or 5 weeks out, this person's just nothing's happening anymore. So instead of okay, I'm just going to keep running this guy into the ground to the show, I'm going to make him healthy into the show. Take the best physique he has right there, because it's only going to look worse later. Mm-hmm. Take that and make that look the best we can by basically making sure he's well fed and looking full on stage versus zombie. That's happened so many times. And I've personally, that's happened as a coach early on. When I first started coaching, it's oh shit, we're behind. Okay, let's keep slashing, let's keep jacking cardio up. And you're man, you put them on stage, and then like 3 weeks later after the show, they look better. Maybe same conditioning, but they look better because they're fuller.
Yeah.
There's more muscle there. So
They
you just
train again.
Yeah, you have to know when to kind of just say, you know what, okay, this is it. I can't really keep grinding here. I got to get this person out of a hole now.
Yeah.
But if you plan well in advance, like Eric was saying, you avoid all that. And that's something I think we've all gotten better at.
Yeah.
You'll still run into those things, like, depending on who you allow to come on as an athlete and, where you're at. Like, it's going to happen, and you have to make the best call you can in the situations. But yeah, it's basically going to come down to, is it worth grinding more to get a little payoff, or, should I skirt these minimums? How long should I do it? Should I do them with diet breaks? And I think that's pretty damn situation specific.
Yeah. Because life happens.
It do.
Even if you have a lot of time, if there's a death in the family or someone had to go away for something or whatever, and while you think you had enough time, here you are a month out and you're like, oh, well, shit. And then you just do what you can. Just important to remind, like, we can't fix everything. I just think I want people to know that, is that it's not always what we want or what the athlete wants.
Yeah. There's not always a good answer, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Or a good solution, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We're done, y'all. That was all the questions I had, or that we had for this one.
Cool.
All right.
Good hosting. You ran that well.
Thanks. Thanks for bringing your fancy asshole to talk to us.
I'm always here to bring my glittery
T-shirt coming your way. And
mm-hmm.
I think everybody did a good job. I think.
He thinks.
I think too.
I think too. Do you think that?
I think.
Okay.
I think you guys think good.
Thanks.
I think.
All right. Talk to you later.
That's so thoughtful.
Hi, 3DMJers. Just wanted to remind everyone to head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and sign up for our Big 3 newsletter. We call it this because, in case you haven't noticed, our team comes up with 3 new pieces of content every week in the form of 2 articles and 1 podcast episode. Rather than remembering to check back with us 3 times a week, we can send it all to you in one single email every Thursday. This weekly digest also includes direct links to any other content that Team 3DMJ coaches are a part of throughout the entirety of the internet. Whether that's guest appearances, interviews, seminars, or courses, you will not miss any of it. So if you like hearing about all the free resources that we have to offer, all the products we sell, all the projects we are a part of, and all the ways you can get discounts, reminders, and early access to them, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com right now and sign up.